Here we go. Okay. Well, thank you to all of you. Before I give you this welcome address, we'll have a short presentation from the authorities, and it's going to be, I think, pretty short, and we organize things so that they are present, but they are virtually present. So it is just the beauty of this all digital organization. Actually, authorities will be joining us at due time, but we didn't want to get started with this kind of formal interventions, so it is up to me to make this initial welcome address. And as some of you may know, I have two hats. One hat is the one that has been already somewhat introduced. For a serious reason, I am the founder and director of Federica Weblearning, and I'm really proud of having been able, with your support, to organize this conference. And I wish to give a special thanks to the whole team at Federica, and especially to Ruth Carey and Valentina Reda, who have been coordinating this great effort here. Thank you. Thank you. That, unfortunately for you, I also have a second hat, which is going to take a few more minutes to, in a way, justify. And I am a political scientist. This is my real job. And so the kind of thought I would like to make here together to introduce this conference is about the politics of MOOCs and where are we now. And let me sure to get this thing rolling, sorry. I'm not very good, but I like to be on time. Here we go. Okay, let's see. And the MOOC revolution is at a crossroad. It is not a technological one, it's political. As everything in politics, it is a fight for control. Control of future trends of development, content, target, and last but not least, access. To understand the actors in this fight, let me give you a very brief overview of public history over the last few centuries. Brief. It is a very simple picture. Two actors have been contending for power, the state and the corporations. At the beginning, about 5 centuries ago, when this competition began, there were only corporations all over Europe. More or less cohesive groups of private citizens exercising some public functions. Be it a city, a monastery, a feudal enclave, corporations had their own statute charter, enforced norms for their members and levied taxes in exchange for military defense and some kind of public order. Then at some point in history, roughly mid-15th century, corporations started to compete for territorial supremacy. You know the story, you know how it went. After 3 or 4 centuries of rather bloody wars, national states emerged as the only corporations with legitimate control over public authority. Well, with one major exception. The New World and the New Republic, America. Has anybody in this room ever wondered why we use the medieval term corporation to identify modern economic giants like Exxon, Coca-Cola, Apple, Microsoft? The answer is quite simple. They are the direct descendants of the ancient European corporations. Well, I'm not telling you that Facebook originated from a monastery, much as maybe Zuckerberg would like to see. So, but yes, they have the same institutional framework. They have gone through the same process of legal incorporation. We don't have time here to go through the fascinating story of how the original European corporations, after landing in America, developed into the modern business corporation. Let's say it's part of the American special touch whenever it comes to making money. What matters to our argument, I'm getting back real quick to the MOOCs, is that corporations have developed into the main institutional actor on the American economic and public scene. Yes, economic and public, together. And the best and clearest example you can get of this mix is from the recent developments of the tech giants. Check Apple or Facebook, Microsoft or Amazon. Are they private? Yeah, sure. But their range of activities reaches deep into every aspect of our public life, from exchange of goods to exchange of opinions. All kinds of public services in our daily life are channeled and to a large extent regulated by the Big Five, who govern the platform society. Of course, the mix between private and public, private ownership and public regulation and function is what in the end makes the difference. What kind of mix? The political difference. Just think of Cambridge Analytica and the crisis over Facebook use of very sensitive personal data, and you have an idea of the stakes, the really high stakes which are at play here. Okay, now that we have the big picture, let's focus on our word, the MOOC word. From an American perspective, it should come as no surprise to you that the main drive for the MOOC revolution has come from the corporate world. A corporate world, in our case, with an important public component. Be it the case of Stanford, where the Coursera revolution began, or Harvard and MIT, the parents, so to say, of edX, the intellectual and organizational drive moving the MOOC revolution is representative of the best US corporate tradition. Private interest for a public mission. Or if you prefer a different formula, making the pursuit of a public mission sustainable. The grand idea, which is the fire behind the MOOC revolution, that fire which I believe all of us share, is to make the best of higher academic education massively accessible. Open, whenever possible, or for sustainability reasons, very moderately priced. So, here is where we are now. That's how we have got so far. But there is something lacking in this picture. Two actors missing on both shores of the Atlantic. In Europe, it is missing the state. In the US, the big corporations. And let's start with our shore, Europe. The actor missing is the state. It is missing at the national level. With the partial exception of France, there is no major or minor European country where the government has taken any serious initiative to foster the MOOC revolution. Ask any of our ministers, what do they think? Well, they just don't think. They wouldn't even know what should be talking about. The overall university landscape is changing. We have now over 100 million learners on the MOOC platforms globally, with tremendous possibilities of massive student inclusion at extremely low costs, and they don't know. It's not that they are against. How could they possibly be? They just do not know. Sheer, perfect ignorance of the tsunami which is about to wipe out the traditional educational system. Just call it Titanic dancing. But the state is not the only absent at national level. After all, some of you may be thinking, MOOCs are a supranational phenomenon. So they are also, and in the first place, a call to action for our supranational government, the European Union. Same answer, missing. The EU is blatantly absent from the MOOC game. Okay, I know the official answer. Education is not comprised within the EU policy domain. I don't buy this. I believe it is a ridiculous answer. This answer could have worked as long as education remained physically confined within the territorial borders of the nation state. But this is exactly what the MOOC revolution has been changing. By making the transfer of academic content a digital and thus virtual circuit, MOOC have become the Schengen of higher education, but with no contribution whatsoever from the European Union. Well, at least no direct contribution from Brussels and Strasbourg, where the key decisions and financial power lay. There are indeed some exceptions. Let me mention here one of those exceptions, a vital one for us at Federica. Federica is now more than 10 years in the making. There are 50 young professionals, mostly women, working at what is one of the largest public university platforms in Europe, with a portfolio of over 150 MOOCs and an international research center, and a distributional platform of our own. All of this could not have been possible without the generous and continuous funding by EU structural funds, the so-called cohesion funds channeled through the regional governments. I am mentioning this not only to pay public tribute to our main financial partner, but also because I hope that Federica's path may be followed by other institutions in those regions, mostly now in Eastern Europe, where cohesion funds are and will be available for some time in the future. However, let's be frank. This is not the kind of European intervention which is necessary if we really want to see a public role in the book revolution. Local help is quite welcome, but it is not enough. Because this is not a local game. It is a global challenge, and it may soon be turned into a global war. Let me conclude with a brief reference to the other missing actor, the big corporations. Well, missing may be a bit misleading. You may say they are not here. I say they are not yet here. But you can be sure they are coming. Just take the example of Microsoft with its acquisition of LinkedIn for over $25 billion. Shortly after LinkedIn's acquisition of Lynda, a provider of professional multimedia education, for $1.5 billion. That's pretty big money and big numbers. I believe LinkedIn at this moment is over the 500 million users threshold. 500 million. Well, are they part of the MOOC market? Of course they are. In terms of content, target, demand, technology, they are competing with us. Us, the university-based network, which has first launched the crusade for top-quality academic content to be distributed on a global scale, open access. So, here I am with my final question to all of you. Do we believe as Europeans and as citizens who care for the public interest, do we believe that this competition, this battle, this forthcoming war for control of the MOOC revolution can be waged and won without the state entering the battlefield? My personal answer is no. The MOOC revolution is at a crossroad. We shall keep on fighting for the mission in which we so strongly believe. But it is time for the national governments, which have direct responsibility for the promotion and independence of public education, and it is time for the EU government, which has a moral and strategic stake in this new global educational environment. It is high time for them to step in and to speak out loud and clear. Yes, with the public governments, we care. And yes, we can. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynotes for this afternoon. Our first speaker is Bruno Siciliano. Professor Bruno Siciliano is Professor of Control and Robotics at Federico, Director of the Center for Robotic Surgery and Coordinator of Robotics Projects for Industry Services and Mechatronics here at Federico. His book, Robotics, is one of the most widely used academic textbooks in the world, and his Springer Handbook of Robotics received the highest award for academic publishing. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruno Siciliano.
Switch to my number 2 passion, okay, which is robotics. And I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak about a lot of excitement in the last 50 years around robotics, and I would say in the last 5 years as I became acquainted with this MOOC revolution. So robotics is a relatively young science, and even more is challenging the venture of this new way of learning and also teaching. So before I just go into the meat of my presentation, I'd like to give you a 5-minute glimpse of all the excitement around robotics in the last 15 years. This is a video which I have prepared, and the video is about how robots are an integral part of our life. So these were the robots developed during the last 15 years. And I'm sure you got an idea how a robot is not only a sort of manipulator arm with a gripper and an effector, but could be any kind of mobile system. So this brings me to the definition of robotics, which is commonly accepted in our community as the intelligent connection of perception to action. So we have a robotic system each time that we have perception, and this is given by sensors. So this is the case, I'm thirsty and I need to get a glass of water, and then I use some visual data as well as some haptic data. And then there is an impulse from the brain, from the intelligence, so it's kind of cognitive input, and the input is actuated by some kind of motor, which in the case of the human, it's like the human arm with muscles, bones, and tendons, and so forth. So these three ingredients constitute what is commonly accepted in the literature as a robotic system. And we try to get good models of each subsystem, the sensors, the control and actuators, in such a way as to be able to design the robots and the intelligent machines of the future. And when we speak about intelligence, there is a hype undergoing not only in Europe, but I would say worldwide. It looks like everything, all our problems of life will be eventually solved by resorting to AI, to artificial intelligence. And often is the case that the two terms, robotics and AI, are used as synonyms. You often read in the media, robotics and AI, AI and robotics. But as an engineer, as a roboticist, of course, this is like the chicken and egg problem. It's like, so as a roboticist, I consider AI one of the enabling technologies for robotics. The same, on the other hand, the AI people think that robotics is just one of the many applications, one of the many declinations of AI. But if we look at our senses, this is a sort of parasitic view of the so-called cortical homunculus. So this is an homunculus in which the importance of the senses have been weighted. And it's no surprise that the sense that we use the most is touch, even more than vision. I mean, this is the case, for instance, for blind people, okay? So this tells us how important is the physical touch by a human and eventually by the robot and the intelligent machine of the future. And that's why a child learns how to grasp an object, not only because he has a brain, she has a brain, but also because of some embodied intelligence into the arm, into the hand, into the fingers. So because of this consideration, we have a big challenge, which the research community is currently tackling. And the big challenge is, on one hand, to study the cognitive aspect of the future intelligent machines without forgetting the physical constraints as given by, in the case of the most developed sense of manipulation. So it's a sort of dichotomy here to our attention, body versus brain, which actually dates back to the times of Greek philosophers, because Aristotle, he believed that human, being intelligent, developed the sense of manipulation and touch, and the opposite view was from Anaxagoras, who believed that man became intelligent because of the capability of interacting with the world by his hands. So, I mean, this is kind of dichotomy, and of course, there is no answer because you can approach the problem one hand on the other hand. But no matter how you approach the problem, the big challenge is really at the intersection of robotics with AI. And I like talking very much about physical artificial intelligence. And when we come to physical artificial intelligence, the challenge is much harder. Because not only do we have to make our intelligent machines more capable on a cognitive type or on a social type, as you saw in the companion robots that were used for kids or for elderly people, but also we have to account for the physical constraints, which cannot be neglected. And in my view, the undiscriminated use of AI for solving all the problems of our life can be potentially dangerous. So it's like blind use of AI. I mean, it's really stupid to ignore if you know the physics, the models of the system that you want to interact with, you should exploit that knowledge. And then, of course, you can improve all the behaviors by resorting to big data, cloud, machine learning, eventually reinforcement learning, but why to ignore the physics? And so this is the case in many contexts. As Ruth kindly said in the introduction, I'm the director of the Interdepartmental Center for Advanced Robotics in Surgery. And the dialogue with the surgeons in such a way, so far, with the only clinical platform for robotic surgery, which is the Da Vinci system by Intuitive Surgical, the degree of autonomy is 0. In other words, the surgeon has no, there's no autonomy for the robotic system, and the robotic system only works as a sort of tele-operated machine replicating the motions of the surgeon in a sort of unilateral way. It's only a physical, a filter of the physical tremor of the surgeon. So we are talking about enhancing the perception of the surgeon and allowing the machine to assist the surgeon, eventually by resorting to all kind of machine learning, big data, and data available in the cloud, but it will always be human to decide, and so always be surgeon A better than surgeon B, and so forth. So, besides cognitive human-robot interaction, as well as social human-robot interaction, we have to consider the issue of physical human-robot interaction. And when it comes to this context, I coined a new acronym, because we are in the age of ICT, Information and Communication Technology. As a roboticist, I like thinking that the next challenge will be in terms of interaction technology, where the A is intentionally capitalized in the acronym to emphasize and to stick to the definition of robotics as the intelligent connection of perception to action, to the physical action. And this was also kindly mentioned in the introduction. I wrote a textbook a long time ago. I think this dates back to the early 90s, where I'd become a young associate professor, and I had the ambition to write this textbook in both languages, in English and Italian. I remember when I went to my editor in Milan, in McGraw Hill Libri Italia. I'm very Southern, so it's like I have a blue blood. So eventually, he didn't believe into the possibility that this crazy Southern professor could write a textbook in English, because English is such a crisp language. I say, no, it's like, and I was held for a year and a half until I sent a manuscript. This was before internet, before email. I sent the physical manuscript to the editor in New York, Avenue of the Americas, McGraw Hill Books in New York. And since I'd sent the lecture notes to the distinguished professor in the US, I had my network of contacts and colleagues. The project was accepted on the first spot. And as a Neapolitan, I take, the pleasure of being paid for the translation from English into the Italian language. So this was a successful story. The third edition of the book, since the second edition, the book is with Springer, which is now part of the Springer Nature Group. So it's a second edition, a third edition, and then it was also translated into Chinese and into Greek. And for someone like me, I did scientific studies, scientific lyceum, and I have a sort of regret that perhaps as an Italian, I would have liked to do classical studies, because it's part of our DNA, I think. And at least I have a classical text in Greek, although this is the modern Greek, it's not the ancient Greek. But it was a sort of, this kind of internal revenge for my regrets. And I met this guy, Mauro. One day he called me and he said, I had read about Federica, the web learning platform, and I'm a curious guy, and I like, to take a new challenge. And after teaching many years of robotics, and I have to say, when I was a young PhD student or a young assistant professor, I considered teaching as a sort of waste of time, because I was so concentrated and so focused on my track, a research track. I had to publish papers, to be promoted, and I consider going to class as a waste of time. There's nothing more enjoyable. I started my day, I started my week on Monday morning with 2 hours class to my student, and it's like Monday morning after Sunday that that we won. I was flying this morning, of course, and because teaching, I used to say, is pure adrenaline. Because when you talk to your folks, to your mates in a conference, basically, the students are virgin in the sense that you have to inject, new concept into the students, and every year is a new challenge with the new generation of students. And robotics is even more exciting because it's highly interdisciplinary. I'm a control guy. I'm a professor of control. Nevertheless, to study robotics, you have to understand mechanics, control, electronics, computer science, measurements, intelligence, and this is really, so fascinating and so stimulating for the students. And I must say, I'm quite proud. I've been tempted a few times to leave Italy and to leave my hometown and my alma mater. Actually, my friends know that when I had the choice, and when I was offered positions in the US, I'm speaking about Georgia Tech in '86 and Stanford, actually, in '89. Those times, there was one man in Napoli. It's the best player of the world, Diego Armando Maradona. So if I stayed in Napoli, it's also thanks to him, because I didn't want to miss those wonderful years where Napoli, was like, so the toughest time of my academic career, in which I was starving after PhD, before becoming an assistant professor, have been the brightest years of our football history. So life is a choice. But I'm proud that most students in US universities, as well as universities around the world, they study on our textbook. So after 25 years of lectures ex cathedra, I just did 2 more courses, part 1 and part 2 of Robotics Foundations, which are based actually on my textbook. And at the beginning, I remember I was with Ilaria, my assistant, that I saw oh yes, she's there. Yes, and normally we give lectures based on slides, like today, and it's a completely different concept, because actually you are against the camera and you're speaking to the infinite. So this is a kind of feeling, you're speaking to the world. And this is completely changing a way of teaching, and then for the students, not only for the students, for all, as Mauro brightly said, all the stakeholders, all the LinkedIn people in profile, is a new way of learning. And it's nice because you know that everything is available on the net, and there is no need to provide all the complementary material, because that can be found in other MOOCs courses as well as on the net. So you can really concentrate on the message you want to share. And my experience with the 2 MOOCs was such that I felt that my video lectures, at the end of the day, they should be the glue to the technical contents that were available through the slides, to that video that you saw that I prepared for the MOOC course, and so forth. So this is really exciting. And for the second part of the course, I'm going to show you this short trailer, which is the trailer illustrating the second part of the Robotics Foundation course, in which I try to show how exciting it could be to study robotics and why robots one day can even outperform the humans. Welcome to Napoli, a city well known for its rich history, art, culture, architecture, music, and gastronomy. Let me take you on a virtual tour to MAN, the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. And this is one of the masterpieces of the museum, the Farnese Hercules. This massive marble statue depicts a muscular Hercules leaning on his club. He's just performed one of the last of the 12 labors, which is suggested by the apples of the Hesperides he holds behind his back. Hercules is firmly grasping the apples in his hand by applying the proper amount of strength. So this is a ball, like one of Hercules' apples, and I'm going to place the ball at the tip of a slender stick. And I'm trying to hold the stick from the bottom by achieving a sort of dynamic balance. That's quite tough. And this is beyond the capabilities of an average human. Only a juggler can succeed in performing this task. Maybe a robot manipulator can likewise perform this task. Not only will we need models of the robot manipulator like those that we studied in the first part of our MOOC course, but also we need planning, sensing, and control, like those dealt with in the second part of our Robotics Foundation MOOC course. So you will learn how to interpolate a trajectory in the joint space and how to design a motion controller for the free space. On the other hand, if the robot manipulator is interacting with the environment, we will need an operational space control scheme. What are the two key ingredients for this kind of scheme? Force and visual feedback, like those that you can see the juggler is applying to perform this task successfully. To successfully perform this kind of advanced manipulation task, we need sensory motor skills beyond those of the humans. So I'm going to take you to virtually on a tour in Prisma Lab at University of Naples, Federico II. My student has just released the stick, and the robot is successful in holding the stick from the button and stabilizing this dynamically. Rodiman is a bimanual humanoid platform having 2 arms, 2 hands, a torso, a sensorized head, and a mobile base. The wheels allow the robot to reach an extended portion of the workspace. So in the final part of the course, you will learn about wheeled mobile robots, and you will learn how to design control algorithms for this kind of robot. Once again, welcome to Robotics and Napoli. I hope you will enjoy this 2-part course, and thank you very much indeed. So this was a trailer for Robotics Foundation 2 Robot Control, which is actually open, is running right now on both Federica and edX. And this was the textbook, but actually the most rewarding project I've done in my life is the handbook. I have 3 children, and as my wife knows, the handbook is my 4th child. I devoted 12 years of my life, 6 years for the first edition, from 2002 to 2008, and another 6 years for the second edition, from 2010 to 2016. And I'm here with mon frère, my brother, frateme in Napoletano, which is, he is Professor Osama Khatib from Stanford University. Probably Candace should know him, yes. And, you know, we are, say, mon ami de jour et de nuit, because we are like, you know, just brother. And he has given a talk in a conference in this Aula Magna last year at the Human Friendly Robotics Workshop. And we were at ICRA. ICRA is our flagship conference, IEEE International Conference on Robotic Automation, which is started today in Montreal. But I had told Mauro that I would be here, and also Napoli was playing home, so I couldn't go to a conference, of course. So, and we were there in Anchorage in 2010, and we both got a award. You know, we got 2 IEEE awards. I can't remember which ones. And then the last day of the conference, we drove from Anchorage to Talkeetna, and we took an aircraft tour over the Denali, in the Denali National Park, the McKinley, which is the highest peak in America. And it turned out that the aircraft had the same corporate color of the handbook, red and blue. So the lady, the director of the communication at Springer, my good friend Renate Bias, they photoshopped and they replaced the name of the aircraft of the and also the logo with as if to imply that Springer authors get private jets to fly on the McKinley Mountain. But the handbook got a prestigious award, which is the Prozia Award, which is given annually by the American Association of Publishers. And the handbook got the award for the category of engineering and technology, but the sweetest surprise, so to speak, was to get the award for the general category of physical sciences and mathematics. And this was not an award for my brother and I, not an award for the 200 authors that took part to the project. It was, as I used to say, the consecration of robotics as a science beyond the boundaries of engineering and technology. So I'm going to show you the story of the handbook. So as you saw, there's a new technology, it's a new multimedia technology. So besides opening a portal devoted to handbook where we collected the best 700 videos or so produced in the 15 years, from which I extracted that 5-minute video which I prepared for you folks, the challenge was to have this app from smartphones, from tablets, in such a way that this becomes an augmented reality, in the sense that you can watch the videos in the book. No matter whether you have the paper copy of the book or just you're watching, you're just showing the chapter on the screen. So this is really very, very exciting. And this is the new challenge. So this is a premiere. It's the first time I speak about this new adventure that I'm doing with, what is Francesca? Okay, ciao. She is my editor for my Springer Nature editor for the Robotics MOOC project. This is a new deal because actually is a book, is a MOOC and book program which Springer offering authors a unique opportunity to create a book complementary to a MOOC, or the other way around, a MOOC complementary to a book, And the MOOC is obviously hosted on the Federica Weblearning platform. So the idea is to combine the quality of a scientific essay with the communicative power of an online educational product. And I'm currently working, actually if you go to the Springer Nature website, you already find an ISBN, and this is kind of scaring me because this is putting a lot of pressure, of course, because I am, just the guy editing the whole effort. And the project will be organized in 4 books, one on knowledge, one on design, one on interaction, and one on the impact of robots. So this is, I would say, in between the textbook, which is a very pedagogical educational viewpoint, and the handbook, which is very much advanced in research. And the idea is to have this as a sort of self-contained, so that people can enjoy the individual chapter and the individual MOOC, and the individual lecture associated with the chapter. So every book is organized in 8 chapters by leading authors in the field, and the ambition is to become a sort of complete authoritative reference in robotics with MOOC supplements. So it's like going beyond the technology of the handbook. And the multimedia content, like videos and other kind, like you saw already in the handbook history video, will be accessed by any kind of mobile device. And the novelty, compared for instance to the handbook, is that every chapter comes with a lot of examples, worked out examples and case studies and exercises. So it will go to the edX platform, of course, for senior graduate and PhD level courses students. But the fun never ends with robotics. So I got engaged in another 2 book projects with Federica Weblearning. First one being a project coordinated by my colleague Stefano Consiglio, who is a professor in our university, and this is a MOOC about Industry 4.0, which is a center of attention in Europe. And I gave a lecture on collaborative and rapidly programming industrial robot. But even more fun has come with the pizza MOOC. The pizza MOOC, where is Evelina? Oh, yes. Hi, Evelina. And she got me involved. So this is a MOOC about the art of making pizza. You know that pizza is UNESCO Patrimoine since 2 years, I believe. And I'm lucky because I'm just ending an advanced grant from ERC, from European Research Council. And the grant is about robotic dynamic manipulation. So basically, it's manipulating objects in a non-prehensile way without grasping, as well as manipulating the form of objects changing shape and dimension as they move. And one day, I was working against deadline late in the lab. This was like 2 days before the deadline for submitting the proposal. And I was with my team, and we were trying about some kind of ideas to demonstrate our concept of dynamic manipulation. We became hungry, and we ordered a pizza. We didn't have time to go to the pizzeria. The pizza came, and again, was Napoli, to brilliantly inspire me. Napoli, I used to say, is a city that trains to complexity and creativity. So I say, oh guys, why don't we take the pizza as an artifact, as a media expedient to attract the attention towards robotics and Napoli. My students say, no, that's not serious, that's a joke. It's not a joke. It was the only funded proposal in robotics by ERC for advanced grant in 2012. So the grant is coming to an end. It will end actually in 10 days, May 31st, but it was a lot of fun. And because of this, I have now this visibility within the food industry, which is also a lot of interest about automation and robotics technology. There is a company based in London, a startup company, they're called Mole Robotics, and their goal is to develop an app. Thanks to that, one day you will be able to order the dish prepared by a Michelin star chef coming to your home, prepared to the concept and to the desire of a star chef. So it's not crazy, but the world is changing. So going to the Pizza MOOC, I just downloaded a trailer, which I think communication started last night, so I'm going to end my talk. It's in Italian. And it's freely available online. As you realize, in my life, I always like to take new challenges. And I have a special motto that probably you saw in the final framework of the previous robotics video. And my motto I share with my students and my friends is, for those of you in mathematics, they know what it means, as long as we go in the positive direction. But I used to say, keep the gradient. Thanks very much indeed. Ruth. Sure, of course.
We have a few minutes for questions, if anybody has anything they'd like to ask Bruno Siciliano.
Question about football, robotics.
Pizza.
Good food, good life. Yes.
Thank you, Bruno, for your great talk. I enjoyed it very much, and in particular also seeing all these moving robots. However, my question is not on the moving robots, but on your handbook. So your handbook is interactive. We can download pictures, movies, and so on. Well, if it's so movable, my question is there any way, do you foresee any way to extend the handbook in the future? Say, the robotics is going very fast. The development of robotics is going very fast. So will you do anything to keep this handbook really live and at the point of the state of the art? Yes. Could you use MOOCs or computer science technology for that?
One way we keep the project alive is that the portal lives beyond the data publication of the handbook, and so people can sign into the portal. The portal is handbookofrobotics.org, so further videos can be loaded. The value of the handbook, it is true that just like if I compare the first edition versus the second edition, there's been a lot of improvement and also enlargement, because we moved from 64 chapters to 80 chapters, and the number of pages from 1600 to 2300. That's true. But there is also a sort of tutorial value, which will stay the same. So, our feeling is that actually we had the first meeting in Madrid, the Mauro's conference hosted by your colleague Carlos Paraguay at Carlos Terciero in Getafe, Madrid, and we already started to work the third edition of the handbook, and probably this will I think the gavel will be passed to the youngsters, because I think it's so Thorsten Kruger is the new guy that we hired as multimedia editor, and he will be involved in the edition. So I think the tutorial value of, in my view, the core methodologies and technologies of robotics has developed in the last 50 years are well tested. And I used to say that any further progress in the field will not be in our scientific community, but will be at the crossroads with other communities, like neurosciences, like biology, like AI, like ethics, like sociology, and things like this. So that's why probably, I mean, the next, and this is very much through the case that, I mean, the most fun part of the handbook is about life and robotics. We had some interaction with the Macmillan people that merged into Spring and Nature, and recently launched a journal which is machine intelligence. So that's why, you know, that's a natural way of growing robotics. So I don't know whether there will be a third edition of the handbook, which is just an update, or maybe from handbook 2, there'll be kind of stacking several, several books or several books and books, you know, just. And this Robotics Book project is one attempt toward that direction. So that's why I intentionally decided to have like 4 stems, you know, like 4 pillars, like knowledge, interaction, design, and impact. Because that's, I think, you know, there are like 4 mainstreams where robotics can be advanced.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I will eat a pizza and discuss it with you on the pizza MOOC.
Gain time and give the mic back to Ruth to introduce our second keynote speaker. Thanks very much again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Bruno Siciliano. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our second keynote speaker for this afternoon, Candace Thille. She is the director of the Stanford Open Learning Initiative, and she's a pioneer in learning science and open educational delivery. She was the founding director of the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University, and part of that then shifted to Stanford when she moved on. She's done groundbreaking work on using cognitive science and rich data on how students learn to try to transform the teaching and learning process. So, ladies and gentlemen, Candace Thille.
Do I need to restart something? Is this working or no? I can stand over here if you need, but it's not projecting. We actually did test this. There we go. Okay, so good afternoon. Whenever we talk about learning, where do we start? We always start with the learner. And what do we know about the learners in MOOCs? They're diverse. They're diverse in terms of their race, their ethnicity, their culture, their religion, their geography, but they're also diverse in other dimensions. They're diverse in terms of the background knowledge that they bring to the course. They're diverse in terms of their goals for why they're taking the course. They're diverse in terms of the skills that they have to be successful in the course. And they're diverse in the attributions that they make, in the meaning that they make from the experience of engaging with the course. And we have to consider all of these dimensions of diversity when we're thinking about how to build an effective learning environment. The second thing to think about is the context. Now, Mauro did a lovely job talking about the context, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, other than to say that it is as Mauro described it. So I'm going to just move right on to the technology. So one of the things we know about human learning is that someone's prior knowledge or belief structure really shapes their ability to learn new things. It can either mitigate or enhance new learning. So I don't know pretty much anybody in this room. I don't know what your prior knowledge is. So I need to get a little sense of that so I know how to speak with you for the rest of my talk. So when we're talking about the power of technology to support and transform education, when I ask people, what is the power of the technology, I usually get one of these three answers. The first one, it's really what MOOCs were originally founded on: access and convenience. If you have a device or a computer, you can learn anytime, any place. Access and convenience. That's a power of the technology. Now, the second one is this power of simulation, that we can create learning experiences using the technology that we really can't do in a place-based classroom. So a lot of the use of augmented reality, virtual reality, or just the old kinds of simulations that we used to do using Flash, where we could have someone build a bridge to learn engineering, drive cars across that bridge, the bridge collapses, but nobody gets killed. So this power of being able to simulate environments in which the learner can engage is a real power of this technology. Now, the third response I get is from people who say those first two responses are kind of 20th century, because they're really just talking about the individual learner interacting with a computer. That the real power of this technology is not the individual interacting with the computer, but that computer is part of a network. It's part of the internet. So you can connect as a learner to other learners, to experts, to resources, to the world. The power of this technology is connection. Okay, so I don't know if that captures the three things you think of when you think of the power of this technology, but now I want to kind of know what you're thinking. So either I could pass the microphone around and everybody could speak. We don't have time for that. So instead, I'm just going to go back to the old vote. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to pick one of these three powers of the technology. And if you had to bet on which one is the most transformative, where are you putting your money? So think about it for a moment. Then we're going to just use an old technology. Raise your hand. Okay? So if you had to bet on the transformative power of this technology, you can only pick one, how many of you would say the real power is access and convenience? Raise your hands. Be proud of your selection. Okay, look around. Everybody look around and see what your colleagues are. Okay, great. How about, man, it's the AR, VR, it's the simulation. It's the things we can do with the technology or even the robotics that we can't do in place-based classroom. Okay, how many people think the real power, what's going to transform it, is simulation? Raise your hands. Oh, come on, raise your hands high, be proud of your perspective. Okay, great. Now, how many people are sitting there thinking, yeah, 20th century, you two? Really, the power of this technology is connection. Okay, look around. Okay, you know, it's interesting, because depending on how I frame that question, you get a different distribution of votes. But in any case, so how many of you are thinking, wait a minute, didn't Ruth say that I'm a professor in the Graduate School of Education at Stanford? What am I doing giving a crummy multiple choice question? Okay, I figured you'd say that. Okay, so how many people were frustrated because what you really wanted was all of the above? Yeah, okay. How many of you actually wanted none of the above? Okay. How many of you just don't raise your hands when you're asked to raise your hands? Okay. Yeah, so actually I agree with you. I agree with you, it's a crummy multiple choice question. I agree with you that all of these things are important. But I also agree with the one gentleman there who said none of the above. To me, the power of this technology to transform education is what Amazon already figured out. It's what Google already figured out. It's what Netflix has figured out. The power of this technology is not to just push it out and distribute. The power of this technology is to push it to an interface. Why? Because in the interface, we can observe the learner. Now, Amazon and Google and Netflix are observing us in their interface all the time. Not so much since GDPR, but anyway, all the time. Why? Why are those companies observing us interacting with their interface? You can shout it out. Why? Yeah, because they can observe us, they collect data from us, and they get to know us better. In that case, they're trying to know us better as consumers, so they can target what we might want to consume better to each of us individually. They're also trying to know us better collectively as consumers. So you might be thinking, Candace, that's kind of creepy that you're talking about learners as consumers. I'm not. In fact, I wholeheartedly will take on anybody who tries to frame learners as consumers. Learning is not a consumptive act. It's a constructive act. However, the idea that I can observe a user in an interface, collect data from them, means that I can get to know them better as a learner. Both an individual learner, but also learners collectively, i.e., how learning happens. So the power of this technology is that we can collect data from well-designed learner interactions, take those data and run them through different modeling algorithms to produce valuable feedback to support the decision-making of the different human actors in the learning system. And that's what this graphic is meant to imply, that we take learner data and we drive powerful feedback loops to learners, to teachers, to learning educational technology designers, and then to learning researchers. So now, how do you do that? Well, one way that you do that is you have to actually construct learning activities that collect data in a meaningful enough way that you can make some kind of inference about the learner's state, while at the same time supporting the learner to learn. So here's a really simple example. This is a simple example out of an introductory statistics course I did in Open edX. And this is a very simple activity that the learner engages in where they're attempting to label a box plot. And it's simple to construct. They just drag and drop the labels to the appropriate place of the box plot. And what the system knows is when they drag something to a particular spot, the system, since we designed it that way, knows what that means and can give the learner immediate, targeted feedback on that action that gets to what we're trying to support them to think. And you can see the same activity where the learner has dragged a label to a correct place and they get correct in green. They get correct feedback. It just doesn't say right or wrong. It says, yes, that's correct, and it reinforces the thought process that we wanted them to go through to know that's where they label it. On the other one, same activity, where they drag the label to the wrong place. It's a common mistake for learners to think that that point is the maximum. It's not. And it carefully says, yes, we understand why you thought that. That's probably what you were thinking, but this is why it's not correct. I had learners, many learners, say to me, how did the computer know what I was thinking? The computer doesn't know what you're thinking, but the people who design the learning experience know when people are trying to label a box plot, common mistakes and misunderstandings they have in their thought process, so you can structure for that. Okay, so we can give the learner immediate feedback, but then what happens is every move that learner makes throws an event to a knowledge modeling system. Now, this is a simplified schematic of the open analytics research system I built at Stanford. It is open source. It can work with edX. It can work with anything that will send events to it. So the learner interacts with open edX. Every time they answer a question or do something, it throws the event to the analytics system, which runs it through different knowledge modeling algorithms to make an estimate about the learner's current state with respect to whatever the learning goal is. So what do you do with that estimate? That's information. It's information that's useful to the different human actors in the learning system. Remember who those actors are? One of them is the learner. So we've been experimenting with different ways of communicating to the learner where they are with respect to their learning goal. So this is one type of visualization. Simply what it is if you had a course and you had learning outcomes, these are what the course is supposed to help you learn, and they have to be stated in observable terms, student-centered observable terms, and then this little sunburst tells you what the system's current estimate is of your knowledge state on all of the outcomes that have been defined for that learning experience. So, like if it's just the innermost thing, that means we don't have enough information yet to make an estimate. You haven't done enough to collect enough evidence for the system to model its inference about your knowledge. The next rung out is we have enough evidence, and our evidence says you probably don't know it yet. And all the way out means we have enough evidence, and we would estimate that if we gave you a task to do this today, you'd do just fine. So trying to shift the learner from thinking about completion to thinking about, do I know what it is I need to know yet? So I'm not just trying to do everything there is to be done, but I'm trying to actively monitor, have I reached the goal that I'm trying to achieve? but also feedback to the instructor. Now, this was a visualization that I did back in 2004 when I was still at Carnegie Mellon doing the Open Learning Initiative, and this was a way of communicating those same insights to an instructor. Same kind of idea, the learning outcomes for that module, and then the bar over here tells you what your class, where your class is. So that bar represents your whole class. You can see it's green, where most of your class means most of your class has achieved that outcome. It's yellow, where half have, and red, where they're struggling. And gray just means they haven't done enough. The instructor could click into that to get more detail. They could see who the students were that were at each part on that knowledge prediction. And you could see how then the instructor could use this information and this insight to think about how to spend the time in class much more effectively. Because if you have insight into where your learners are getting it and where they're struggling, rather than just spending the time giving your third lecture, then you can really target supporting the learners. And then feedback to both course designers and to learning researchers. And this is another open project that is a collaboration among Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and the University of Memphis. This is a project called LearnSphere. This was an attempt, or is an attempt, to get MOOC researchers or educational technology-mediated learning experience researchers from all over the world to not only share data safely, but share analytic processes so that we can all be doing research and making sense on the large amounts of data that we're all generating in our MOOCs. And this is kind of an example of one of the tools. You can go here and just start using this tool. You don't need to know how to program. That's why we built it in this sort of block way. So you can just drag blocks together and connect up the analytic process and analyze data sets using different modeling algorithms. So why do that? It's because learning can be undergirded by the sciences. So which sciences? Which sciences do we draw on for learning? Are there scientists in the room? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so my lab at Stanford is called Lytics Lab, and it's an interdisciplinary lab. The doctoral students in my lab are neuroscientists, they're cognitive scientists, they're social psychological scientists, they're measurement and assessment scientists, and of course, they're ML, machine learning and data scientists. And all of these students come together from each of their disciplinary perspectives because it takes that interdisciplinary action to actually understand the complexity of human learning. I mean, I could share a couple fun things we've learned out of those, but then we can do that if we have time at the end. But the point I want to leave you with is that learning is complex. It's not just a matter of having information in your head and wanting to get it into Martin's head, so I'm going to open up his brain and pour it in. It's not a transmission act. It's also not a consumptive act. If you're a learner, you're not just taking in whoever is up here is putting out. You're actually you're taking everything I'm saying or everything anybody around you is saying, and you are making your own meaning out of it. And the meaning that you're making out of it has a lot to do with the prior knowledge structures that you already have built. So it's very much a construction and an interpretive act. So simply pushing information out without being able to get some insight into how you're constructing what you're making out of what we're putting out we can't actually facilitate learning. So, how many education researchers, learning researchers do we have in the room? Okay, great. So for those of you that have been in the field of education or education research, there's a lot of learning theory out there. And different people draw from different theoretical perspectives. In fact, I did a conference 15 years ago at Carnegie Mellon, where I wanted to bring together people who came from a behaviorist perspective, from a cognitive perspective, and different types of cognition, symbolic reasoning, AI kind of stuff, people who work in situated cognition or the social construction of learning, just learning research from all these different ilks. And one of my colleagues said, Candace, you do that, it will be a bloodbath. Because, as my colleague Ken Kadinger used to say, learning theories are like toothbrushes. Everybody has one. Nobody wants to use anybody else's. So you end up, when you're trying to support someone to make an instructional differentiation decision, like if I'm trying to say, I'm going to teach Catherine something right now, what's the best thing for me to do to support her learning? What kind of thing do I give her to think about or do or listen to? That's when the debates start. And people will usually speak in binaries. For example, if I'm teaching you something and you're a novice, you don't know anything about it, is it better for me to give you just the basics, the foundational stuff? Or is it better for me to give you something challenging so that you can struggle with it and build a more deep, complex understanding? Which is better? That's an instructional differentiation decision you have to make. Once you make that decision, then you have to decide, okay, let's say I'm going to give you more help with basics. Is it better for me to give you focused practice, distributed practice, or interleave practice? Once you make that decision, let's say I've decided I'm going to give you help with the basics, focused practice. What kind of practice? Do I give you a worked example to study? Or do I give you a problem to solve? Or do I interleave a worked example and problems? Once I decide that, I have to decide, okay, if I'm going to give you basic help, focused practice, and I'm going to test you on problems, then do I give you feedback? And if I give you feedback while you're doing problem solving, is it better to give you concrete feedback, abstract feedback, or mix it? Is it better to give you immediate feedback, or delayed feedback, or no feedback at all? Is it better, when I'm giving you topics in this, to block them, to fade them, mask them, put them all together? And you can see, do I explain? Do I inquire? Do I mix? And there are many other choices. So you can see it every moment when you're trying to decide how best to support the learner. The number of decisions you have to make quickly becomes exponential. It's much easier just to talk at people and hope they make meaning out of it. But what we know is that's not how people actually learn. So, what do we do with all this complexity? How do we manage all this complexity? And one of the things about we humans and our brains is we actually don't like complexity. Our brains are kind of wired to come up with patterns and then follow those over and over and over again. You could think of it as our brains are lazy. I don't think of it, I think of it, our brains attempt to be efficient. So they're always trying to take the least energy path to solution. So when we come into this kind of complexity, what we end up doing in order to reduce it, in order to manage it, is to reduce it. So we manage complexity by reducing it, because our brains can't handle that number of dimensions. However, that's the power of the technology, is it doesn't actually bother an algorithm to deal with multiple dimensions. So the real key is figuring out, it's a design question, what part of this decision-making do we have the machines do? What parts of the decision-making do we have the humans do? And where do you best build these machines to support the human decision-making? And so I want to say that where you always have to start and always have to end is with the learner. And thinking about how do you support a learner in that kind of complexity using the machines to augment decision-making. And I have a particular belief about that, is you set up these virtuous cycles. So you start off with the insights we already have about learning. There has been decades of learning research that we can start with as a beginning point to formulate hypotheses about how to best support learners. And we use those insights to design much better learning experiences than we currently design with the technology today. Those better learning experiences lead to better learner activity interactions. And those learner activity interactions generate data. And we get better learning data if you're generating the data off of a designed activity, and we can get better models for modeling that data and making estimates and predictions. Those better learning data with the better models then drives better insights for all of the actors in the system, for the learners, for the instructors, for the learning designers, for the learning researchers. And those better insights then allow us to build better learner experiences, which starts the virtuous cycle all over again. So I'm going to close, well, with a couple quotes, because as Ruth mentioned, I was at Carnegie Mellon for 12 years, and if you're at Carnegie Mellon for any amount of time, you always have to quote Herb Simon, because he was just an amazing Nobel laureate, actually in economics, but he thought a lot about intelligence, about learning. And he said back in 1991, improvement in post-secondary education will require converting teaching from a solo sport to a community-based research activity. And I took the liberty, some would say heresy, of modifying Herb Simon's words back in 2015, and I added, improvement in post-secondary education will require converting teaching and courseware and platform and analytic system development from a solo sport to a community-based research activity. And the power of this technology is it finally enables us to engage in that community-based research activity. Which leads me to my last question to you. Another Nobel economist, William Baumol, who posited this theory called cost disease, in which back in 1967, he was looking at labor markets and showing that cost would become prohibitive in certain labor markets where labor was where the people who performed that labor were both in sectors that could scale human labor with technology and those that couldn't. And the two examples he gave of sectors of the economy that would be really harmed by cost disease were music. As he popularly said, it takes 2.5, he said man hours, I'll say person hours, to play a Beethoven horn quintet. And any attempt to make that more productive is going to degrade the experience. So productivity and quality were not possible because it's a labor-intensive sector. Now, we know now that Baumol's cost disease has kind of been solved for music. All of us walk around with, on our phone with a musical experience that you historically could only get if you were sitting listening to a live quintet in a chamber. The mistake we're making in education is thinking that the same technology that mitigated Baumol's cost disease for music is the same technology that's going to mitigate it for education. Because that was the other sector he was talking about. That given there's no way, because of cost disease, that we can, without a complete revolution in our approach to teaching, we cannot go beyond our current levels of productivity. And he said that back in 1967. And we thought we solved it with the same technology by recording what we think of as education, recording lectures and distributing them and playing them out. But as we've seen, and what we know, that's only part of the equation of solving learning. That what we really need to be able to scale is the support of the learner to build the meaning and the practice that we want them to build and that they want to build. So the same technology that solved Baumol for music is not going to be the same technology that's going to solve it for education. But, as he said, we need a complete revolution in our approach to teaching. When I used to give this talk back in 2013, something like talking about Baumol, I would say, given the technologies and what we are able to do with them now, in terms of constructing well-designed learning experiences, collecting data from those experiences, modeling them to get real insight into the learner's state, and then using that to give feedback to the different actors in the system, that this revolution, I used to say, is possible. Now I say this revolution is happening. But my question is the same as it's always been. And it's also the question, to some extent, that this session was opened with. If this revolution is happening, who is going to lead it? Is it going to be the textbook publishers, Google, Amazon, the corporations? Is it going to be the state? Or is it going to be the people in this room whose mission it is to support learning and education for the world? Thank you. So now, I'll take both questions and also challenges. Because I'm sure that everything I said, there are a bunch of people in this room who probably disagree with a bunch of stuff I said. Anybody? Okay, great.
I can start. Let me start with the beginning.
Okay.
We were talking about GDPR.
Yes.
So you have this open edX system which you built. When I'm using that system, could I say to the system, please, during my learning experience now, don't send any data to the server?
So could everyone hear Martin's question? Yes. So yes, the answer is yes. And even before GDPR, when I was building the OLI environment starting back in 2002, I always built it as a research environment, which meant in a US university, I had to go through something called the Institutional Review Board, which reviews all human subjects research. And I was doing human subjects research, because what I was doing is I was building these like open statistics courses, and then based on human learning theory, I'd introduce different kinds of interventions. And so when you logged into the course, you could be assigned one condition or another condition. And then I could collect the data and make some estimates about which ones seemed to facilitate learning better. You know, these kinds of questions I was asking about, like immediate feedback, delayed feedback, under which context. So since I was doing research, I needed to go through my institutional review board. And one of the things they require is that you notify subjects in research that they are participating in research, and they have to have an opportunity to opt in and opt out. So every time you logged into or created an account to start work in an OLI course, the first thing you got was a consent form that basically said that I'm doing research and you consent, and I told you how I would protect and take care of your data, but you had the choice at the bottom of saying I agree or I disagree. And the only difference in agreeing or disagreeing was whether the data collector was turned on. So the learner experience didn't change at all. It was only whether we were collecting your data for research purposes. The other thing was that you always had up in the little corner, no matter what course you were in, you always had a little signal that told you what your research status was. And at any point, you could click on that and say, and change your mind. Either stop collecting my data or go ahead and collect my data. So that's how we dealt with that.
That's
Yeah.
very,
The thing was,
very, very good. I mean,
yeah.
It's not that what you expect when now the big companies.
No, and I'm on leave from Stanford right now, working at Amazon, and one of the things I'm writing there for Amazon is the guidelines around the responsible use of learner data. And my reason for that, there are lots of reasons for that, but one of them is, in order to really learn in these technology-mediated environments, you actually have to try stuff you don't know how to do. You know, you learn best when you attempt to do something and you struggle through it and you make mistakes, and different people kind of get it at different points in time. But in order to actually be supported, you have to really be honest about what you know and what you don't know and not try and game the system. So my concern is if people think that the data is being collected for other reasons other than just to support your learning, if it's being collected to make some kind of evaluation about how fast you learn something and how smart you are or what job you should be able to have, then my belief is if people believe that the data is being used for other purposes, then people will start gaming the system because they want their data profile to show up to meet an end that they're trying to meet, which will totally interfere with the system actually being able to support learning. So there are real reasons, beyond just ethical and moral reasons, why learner data at this fine-grained level really needs to only be used to support learning.
May I add a question now, less destructive ones, let's say.
Okay.
What you have in this Simon message before is talking about community.
Mm-hmm.
Your system is a system where a single person is learning, at least it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So how you think that we can support community-based learning, group learning?
Okay, so there are actually two different answers to that question. One is, how do you support a community of learners? And then the other one is, how do you support a community of learning providers, instructors, learning researchers? So does anyone know the actual origin of the term MOOC? Yeah? Yeah? Do you want to say what it was?
Oh, yeah, the connectivist MOOC, George Siemens.
Yeah, so there were two people in Canada, George Siemens and David Cormier, who first coined the term MOOC, and their MOOC was a course, an open course on connectivism. And the way they ran the course was they basically just invited students. They had 12 students on campus, and then they opened it to the rest of the world. And they didn't set the curriculum, set all the resources. They posed the questions and got the community of learners to co-construct the learning experience. It was kind of at the medium as the message for what they were trying to create. And unfortunately, then when Sebastian Thrun did his first MOOC and got 12,000 learners and was interviewed, I think, by Inside Higher Ed, he used the term MOOC, saying he'd created a massively open online course, and that kind of appropriated that term and made it to mean what we think of now as a MOOC. But the original idea behind a MOOC, a massively open online course, was that the learners, the community, would co-construct the learning experience. So the way to do that, I mean, there are lots of examples of that being done successfully. One of them is the Scratch community out of MIT. There are many ones where the learners, where you basically, the idea is you're analyzing learning in terms of participation in a community. And when you're new to the community, you're often on the periphery, where you're observing and trying to understand how things are going, and then you actively more and more participate and move more towards the center and develop expertise through your participation. So I think those are the most successful ways of creating a community around learners and technologies that support that. For learning providers, and when I think of learning providers, my primary thought is faculty. So I created a open educational resource on introductory statistics. So how many people teach introductory statistics in a year worldwide? Yeah, thousands. And most of our practice as faculty is we write our syllabus, we get our textbooks, we come up with our activities, we come up with our lectures, and we teach it to 30 to 300 to 500, depending on how big your class is. And that happens over and over and over again. And we don't get a lot of feedback on how effective any particular strategy was in supporting learners to understand introductory statistics. So the first thing was creating this OLI course. The first OLI course in introductory statistics was not just done by me. It was done by a collection of statistics faculty who had to build alignment on what does it mean to say that you have achieved success at an introductory level of statistics. And just having that conversation among faculty is really kind of interesting, getting alignment on that. And then bringing together the learning researchers, the statistician experts, the human-computer interaction people, the software folks, all combining together to build a piece of courseware to support introductory statistics. Then collecting the data on what seems to be working and not working, for whom, under which conditions. So being able to then target the improvement at that courseware based on the data that you're collecting from the learners. Now, making that a collaborative sport would require a different kind of authoring tool, which, to my knowledge, no one's built yet, which is an authoring tool that would allow you to make a modification to the course for your students, and then collect the data on that modification to see whether the thing that you built actually has evidence that it supports learning or not, making that available to a wider community, and having many, 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 many different students using these different versions at a very fine-grained level. And through that data, being able to essentially create the best learning experience, differentiating instruction for individual learners. But that authoring environment doesn't exist yet, that I know of. Yeah.
Hi. So my question is related to the time we were speaking about, like the decision a teacher is supposed to make to easily distribute his content and make the learning process more smooth. So you were talking about like multidimensionality in the learning process. And my question is, to what extent do we have today a general purpose model that allows for this kind of action or this kind of estimation And the second part of my question is that I'm a PhD student in machine learning.
Great.
So for me, when you say that for algorithm, multidimensionality isn't a problem, for me it's kind of not true, because for me it's like a curse, because an algorithm cannot treat many dimensions at one time. So the second part of my question, to what extent are we able to build a model that's at the same time general purpose in the sense of estimating the behavior of the learner, and general in the sense of we can assess it actually, and we can avoid the noise in the signals.
Great. So, to answer your question, it doesn't exist yet. That's where the research is. And that's why my research lab had computer scientists, machine learning students, and learning researchers of other kinds, informing the way what do we basically already know, and so what features do we start with to start to train the algorithms. There are a couple places where machine learning is actually really useful in building this, this kind of environment. One of them is in recognizing patterns and setting policies. I just did an experiment with a few thousand learners on using a reinforcement learning algorithm to select and sequence activities for learning some basic skills in linear algebra. And intentionally, because one of the challenges is we have lots and lots of learning activities that people say is about this. It's teaching vector addition. But whether it's actually teaching vector addition or not, we don't know. It's just what the person who wrote it thought it did. So if we have tons of assets and we want to select and sequence them for a learner to support them to go from their current state to some kind of more knowledgeable state, then we either have to have humans selecting and sequencing those activities, or if we can train algorithms to select and sequence, then you can see that we can build things much more quickly. So one of the things that was interesting, that I found interesting in this algorithm was, as I said, there were a couple activities. I had an instructor, a linear algebra instructor, essentially create the activities and label them for what they taught. And we had 3 versions of the little module. One version was the instructor designated sequence. One version was open navigation. We just exposed all the activities to the learner and let the learner decide which ones to do in what order and what would help them learn. And then the third was this reinforcement learning algorithm. And the reward function we gave to the algorithm, its goal was to maximize learning gain and minimize the number of activities that the learner had to do in order to achieve that learning gain. So all conditions had a pre-test and post-test, and then we let the learners, then we randomly assigned the human learners to each of those 3 conditions. And the reinforcement learning algorithm did a couple things. It did actually do better than either the instructor designated sequence or the learner decided sequence, free navigation sequence. It did better in terms of maximizing learning gain and minimizing the amount of time the learner had to spend learning. But the other thing that it did, which I found more fascinating, is it identified the activities that were mislabeled. Because it saw that even though this thing was labeled vector addition, when it would give it to a human learner, between things that it started to know were vector addition, there was no evidence of learning gain between those 2 spots. So since it didn't have evidence that it was actually supporting the learner to achieve what it was going for its reward function, it stopped assigning that. So I think that the machine learning is helpful in identifying patterns, for modeling learning, for labeling unlabeled data, and I'm also looking at it for helping construct learning activities, because constructing learning activities is very labor intensive, as well as setting the policies of sequencing activities. But yeah, this is all, none of it is commodity yet, which is part of what frustrates me about all of the ed tech companies out there saying, trust us, it works. You know, that's alchemy. It's not science. So I think we're done. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So sorry we're out of time. It's now time for the coffee break until 4:30. At 4:30 we have the policy, research and experience tracks with a variety of sessions in parallel, the Italian track, and then at 6 o'clock we also have another session leading on directly from that session in the experience and research, so please choose where you want to be. And then we'll meet for a welcome drink at 7 on the 3rd floor. Thank you.